okay, this is what you're doing. Your small blind fold to steal is currently 81%. It should be 73%. We fix it.
Sure.
Right? It's
Yeah,
just
it's all
all
simple
very
from this perspective.
yeah, it is simple. Like it's boring.
No,
Like if you actually know how to do it, it's boring. Like it's very simple, very mechanistic, very thorough.
Yeah, so now we got something really special. You're the guy who's coached the most students, 1,000+ students, and you're taking them to a guaranteed 9 or 10, 8 or 9, or is 9 or 10 big blind per 100 win rate.
So sure. So that would be great. So I've coached over 1,000 people for sure, 100%. And so a lot of those players are staked players where I'm plugging leaks where it's less dedicated, right? It's less like it's harder to coach 1,000 people once a week for a year because there's not 1,000 hours in a week. So, but I do run a program, a CFP program, where I coach people and I take a percentage of their profits. And when I coach people on that basis, I'll take like break-even players or slight losers or very modest winners, and I'll coach them once a week for a 12-month period. And out of that program, almost everybody comes out with like a 7, 8, 9 big blind per 100 win rate. Almost everyone.
Okay. Really, there's no like someone who was it because they're already like winners that they're already self-selected. That you don't have people that just weren't smart enough or whatever.
Yeah, so you would. Yeah, so I mean, I think that there could be like some positive variance within the sample for sure. But the players aren't selected for being winners, right? So there are like slight losers that start the program, but they're not massive losers, right? So there would be like maybe slightly losing players, but usually like they're break even in terms of their results. But I look at their numbers and I'm like, okay, this guy's actually losing. He's just run good so far. And then we start working together. The program is basically like very focused on skill acquisition. So I start with like pre-flop strategy, like making sure that all of the different pre-flop strategies are correct and dialed in, and we just hammer at those. It doesn't take that long, and then we move to very like isolated, narrow, targeted improvements. So we'll go like early position c betting versus the big blind, and we'll move like from early position c betting versus the big blind to middle position. And the reason that we're starting from earlier positions is because it's easier. So like the people will understand it much more quickly. Like if you start from the button, there's a lot more variability in the strategy. So you get to that last, right? EP, especially in tournaments, right? EP 10.
Well, you want to go. I would presume. I mean, you're kind of describing what I would presume the way to teach, which is you would like systematically go through every single situation, and you do it from easiest and. Well, you'd factor in easiest, but also most having most utility. But that like kind of solves itself because it mostly solves itself because like pre-flop is easiest and has most utility, and then under the gun. Under the gun does not have the most utility compared to the button to learn, but it is the easiest, and you just like keep adding more and more layers to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then by doing that, what ends up happening is you teach the student like the game theory or the sort of like more the bigger concepts, but as they apply to this very narrow scenario, right? And then you kind of like incrementally build through the strategy, and then after they've been doing it for like 2 or 3 months, a lot of the ideas get repeated, right? So it's the same types of ideas that are driving the outcomes. So they have a familiarity with the ideas as they get to like more and more complicated spots. So so that's basically like how the program works. In the beginning, it's very kind of tedious. It's a little bit slow, but it really starts to pick up after like a few months where like they're more familiar with the vocabulary and like the big picture ideas about like how poker works. So like concepts that I like to use are like from old school toy games sometimes, like the idea of like zeros, ones, and twos. I don't know how familiar you are with this as a toy game model.
Zeros, ones, and twos.
Yeah, so like it would be the idea that like most betting ranges should be composed like if you order a 0, 1, and a 2 as a 0 loses to a 1 loses to a 2, so a 2 is the nuts, a 0 is trash, and a 1 is a medium strength hand, right? Betting ranges are composed of 2s and 0s, right? Checking and calling ranges are primarily composed of 1s, right? And so like people like those basic ideas, lots of people who are playing at lower limits don't understand those, like that's really what they're trying to do when they're playing the game for the most part.
Right.
And like those big ideas, like you start to see patterns emerge as they kind of learn these ideas. And yeah, for the
Can you
most
give a
part.
couple examples of patterns?
Sure. So, I mean, zeros, ones, and twos would be one, which is like, you'll see that medium strength hands mostly check and call. You'll see that like nuts and air mostly, our betting ranges are composed of nuts, primarily strong hands and air.
That's obvious.
Yeah, that's obvious, right? But it's obvious to you because you're a jungle man. But if you're like a low to mid stakes player, a lot of people that's actually not obvious. But
Right.
as far as geometric progression, right? Bet sizing across streets. So if we're talking about turn strategy, which is a much bigger topic for pretty much, yeah, it's one of the biggest topics of the entire game, I think. If we're especially from a teaching perspective, it's the one that I struggle with the most. I'll set like the default. I'll teach people that the default bet sizing strategy should be basically like a geometric size, as long as we're dealing with like relatively limited stack depth. So if you're talking about like 0 to 100 BBs in tournaments, turn bet sizing will start with like a geometric bet size as the foundation, and then you'll go bigger than that if the equity is basically like fragile. So if your opponent has a lot of draws, for example, you may scale the bet sizing up from like a default geometric size. And then if nut ratios are high, you'll drop bet sizes down to a lower size, right? And so if like flushes come in, board pairs in a way that's adverse for you, etc., right? You'll straights come in, the bet size will take that geometric bet size and we'll drop it down. And you start seeing these things like happen over and over and over again, and people start developing familiarity with some of the ideas, and they typically play better.
Okay. All right. Well, that all makes sense. I'm a bit curious of this model that you're using to make money, which is percentage based. Really?
Sure.
Because it seems like a lot of people have struggled with staking. Did you not have some issues with staking? I mean, it sounds like you've just made this thing work. Yeah, a lot of people just fail to make percentages work, man, because it's not that easy to choose winners, I would think. But you're saying that it's easy to choose winners almost.
I mean, like easy is you develop an expertise, right? Like most people would say that it's not easy to win online poker, but would be a pretty good example of someone who's been able to do it. If you work at it for a long time, it's not that difficult. You have databases like SharkScope, for example, where you can see if someone's winning. You search someone's results, you find out how well or poorly they're doing, and you can start with winners if you want. They get sought after by other staking groups, so that group is usually very competitive. But you can also search for like break-even players, and you can break down their performance, right? And you can say, okay, like this person's a break-even player net, but that's because they lost a bunch of money playing 1Ks and 5Ks, right? And if they played $0 to $100, they're actually winning, right? So you can re-engineer their game selection so that they're actually a winning player that you start with, right? You provide them with financing, and you're off to the races. I mean, like it's not that hard. It's not. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's easy. The bigger problem comes from like personal life leaks, right? So sometimes you'll be working with someone who has like a drug problem, or you'll be working with someone who has like you work with a lot of people who have really bad financial management, right? And so we've had to pay rent for a lot of our players. We've had to pay out leases for cars for a couple of players.
All right.
So I mean, like it gets to be like a pretty intensive like package when you stake like a group of people, because you want to be able to provide a lot of support to people. Obviously, you don't want to get taken advantage of, but if you trust the person that you're working with, and you want to make sure that their life is kind of progressing in a way that's constructive. So you don't want them to like miss opportunities just because they don't have enough money.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, how do you figure out if you can trust them?
You start by work. I mean, you can start with references, but references are usually limited in staking because usually they haven't been staked by a bunch of other people. So references are always going to be limited. So you can mitigate the risk by starting off small, right, and scale into like higher stakes. You can be like, listen, the intention is to stake you for, I don't know, $300 ABI online tournaments or $200 ABI online tournaments, right? That's the intention. That's the end goal, right? But we're going to start at this other point so that we can like build a rapport and like find out if we can work with you, if you can work with us, etc. Right? So you start off small, scale into higher risk endeavors, which is pretty much a business strategy in everything, right? Start small and scale in, as opposed to just like biting off super high stakes with some guy that you've never known and he just loses all your money.
Well, that's pretty stupid.
Yeah, sure.
Um, I've got two questions. One is, I would think, well, do you deal with these life leaks at all? Do you have ways of solving if someone is, say, spending too much of their money, or has a
hmm
gambling leak, or like,
hmm
are you actually able to prescribe the right person or whatever it is
hmm
to help with these sorts of things?
So I don't have like a team of specialists on the call that like to help people cope with things, but you would be, I think, surprised at how many people just need to talk with someone who behaves maybe a little bit more rationally than they do, and having certain conversations about like things that aren't important or things that are important, pushing them to resources that are helpful. So there are like plenty of like early retirement, um, like financial management, like money management blogs and resources that are available online. Mr. Money Mustache is actually like a very like sort is a very probably the most popular um, like extreme early retirement type of thing. But the lessons that come from that are really about like financial management and money planning. And I refer people to that a lot when they really struggle with like financial management issues. But I also work with people directly, right? So like we'll get on call, we'll have conversations. I have managers who do the same thing, and sometimes the life leaks come from like they have personal problems, like with a spouse or with a loved one, with a girlfriend or whatever, and those things are contributing to like friction, and they don't have someone to like kind of talk with and like vent, if you will. And so they end up, if they don't have those resources or those outlets, then they go spew the money off. Like they'll get really emotional and they'll go do something really damaging. But if they have, it sounds ridiculous, but if they have people that they can talk to about their problems, they're less likely to behave in kind of like destructive ways. Especially if like the behavior is like audited, because when you stake them, their behavior is audited, right? Like if they go gamble off all of their money, they know that they're gonna have to talk to somebody about it. Whereas if they're on
Right.
their own, it's there's less personal responsibility to a third party.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to enforce people to collect their debts, because now there's like an ad hoc audit to it, because people know if there's accountability, people don't act the same way.
Yeah, no, they don't.
If there's not, um, but yeah, it makes sense that if someone's going through some tough stuff, that if they just have someone to talk to, that could potentially help a lot. I could see. Um, no, that's interesting that you apparently can solve. Well, it makes sense that you can solve something like bad financial planning. I'm wondering if you can solve deeper issues such as certain kinds of tilt, or
Mm-hmm.
I would think there's different kind of methodologies for solving like, yeah, those sort of soft leaks, like certain kind of tilt, like maybe someone can't bluff enough,
Mm-hmm.
or they just they just can't take being three bet three times in a row, or
Sure.
it's those. If you could solve those as well, that really solves like a large myriad of problems, and it leads into bigger stuff.
Yeah, so I would say like a lot of the problems that like winter like tilting, a lot of those problems come from people not knowing what to do, right? Like frustration, oftentimes, not all the time, but frustration oftentimes comes from people that do like comes from a lack of knowledge. Like if you don't understand how things work, um, like they don't understand, for example, if someone three bets them three times in a row, that maybe the guy's just running good, maybe he's not picking on you, right? And so
Hmm.
because they don't understand how the game works at all, they get really paranoid. Like they're right, and so educating people about how poker works, coaching them regularly in terms of their actual skill sets. Right, I personally believe that for the most part, confidence comes from knowing what to do and like demonstrating that you actually know what to do. Right, and so
Yeah,
if
I
you
agree.
learn, yeah, so if you learn how a spot works, and then you drill how the spot works with no money at stake. This is like more of a recent phenomenon with the way that the technology has gone. But if you're coaching someone today, drilling is a big part of how I coach today. So if I teach someone how a spot works, we go over how it works, we go over all of the ideas about how c betting from early position versus the big blind works. 10 high plus boards, in tournaments, we're going to c bet pretty much c bet range on 10 high plus boards, especially with no straights possible. And then they go drill it, right? So they develop so they go from we filter in their own database for all the times that they played the hand badly, which would be checking in those scenarios, right? Then from there, we say that this checking's bad. You should be betting in these scenarios. Then from there, they go drill the scenario, and now they know how the scenario works. So once they have the confidence in that spot, the mistakes get much less common, I guess, and the emotional baggage that comes with the spot is reduced. So like as you work through issues in their strategy itself, the tilt issues are diminished. Doesn't mean they go away. But my primary mechanism or strategy for dealing with like people who tilt because of something at the table is making them a stronger player. That's the number one.
Okay, this seems to not solve it at its core, by the way, but it's it seems to solve it by just making someone. Yeah, just by making someone less likely to encounter the situations that cause them to tilt, basically.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, like I think that if I come on here and I claim that I can I'm a magician and I can make someone who's really emotionally charged less emotionally charged, I don't have that skill set. So I apologize for that. I don't have that skill set. But I can take someone and make sure that when they're playing poker, that they're just less emotionally frustrated while they play the game, right? And cause them to erupt less as a result of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I would think I'm a little bit surprised you didn't go into this topic, but I would think breathwork and meditation actually would solve it. As I'm talking, I'm like, oh yeah, duh, of course, breathwork and meditation, like does exactly this.
Sure.
Or that's one of the many functions of it that attempts to solve that. It's like the problem's core. I'm curious how many millionaires you've made.
I don't know how many millionaires I've made. The guys that work with me, my business partner, who was a player who played for me, he played poker for me initially, and then ended up staking players alongside me. John, hold it. I don't know if he wants anybody to know that, but so that would be one. Connor would be another, and yeah, I don't know the list of how many millionaires I've made, but it can be relatively difficult to make some like huge long list of millionaires, but I've coached and helped a number of people get close to that number, but. As far as players that I've produced that are worth 5 million, 3 million, 8 million, there's not a long list of those. No, not
right. Of course, that's of course going to be true. So what are some extreme examples of people that you coach? Because you said it seems like almost everyone has the same results. Do you have some extreme outliers, and is there a reason for them? Did you find one a couple guys that are extremely good for whatever reason, and then also the opposite, so someone who just can't seem to win for some kind of reason? I'm a bit curious. Yeah, I'm curious of those sorts.
Yeah, so on the staking side, it's more rare to encounter people that just can't win because again, we have a filtering system when we start them, so that we engineer for an outcome that's pretty positive. So if we take a player that on a net basis is break even, right, but then we identify which games they beat, which part of their game selection is really profitable. We concentrate the action there. We concentrate the investment there. So then they are naturally more successful and they're going to be winning right out the gate. And then we kind of coach them to try to improve the win rates and help to maintain that. As far as players that have been really successful that people are familiar with that I've coached and worked with, I don't want to take credit for their success. So it just sounds weird, but Jerry Wong, who had was a player that coached and was coached and staked by me. Right before he left, right after he left, he final tabled the WSOP main event. Michael Adamo is a player that was coached and staked by me. He left.
Really?
He left prior to his massive success. So I did not enjoy the fruits of his labor and all of the success that he's done, and I don't take any credit for it. But yeah, Michael Adamo, Jerry Wong, like I said, Connor Beresford. I could try to pull up a list of guys, but it's there's a long list of guys, man. It's a long list of guys.
Is there a reason for their success? Or do you just not know?
Is there a reason for why they're successful? I mean, the guys that are successful put the work in. I mean, universally, that's a precondition for being able to compete effectively is some sort of an obsessive personality, some amount of this is the only thing that I'm doing. I'm very focused. I'm not distracted by a lot of other things. Those are preconditions for doing very well. Is there something that sets people apart and makes them do really poorly? I mean, I would argue the opposite, right? A lack of focus. But I wouldn't say that there's some other trait that's super super obvious. Other than like persistence, right? Like not quitting. You have guys that are you have to be sort of good at mathematics, but you don't have to be good at calculus, right? Like you have to be good at like very quick, basic, elementary level mathematics. But you don't have, yeah, like I said, you don't have to be, you don't have to be a math major to do it.
Yeah. I never really used any calculus for. I don't know
Yeah,
if I've ever used any calculus for online poker, to be honest.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you just have to do,
For
like
anything,
basic.
to be honest, like what the people use this for.
Yeah, you have to use basic mathematics like pretty quickly, and there's like a correlation probably between people that can't do it and people who are more likely to fail. But again, on the staking side, I tend to hire people who have already been successful in some area of the game, right?
Right.
Yeah, even if on a net basis they're not. Go ahead.
So you don't ever take like guys that you don't flirt with the idea of taking guys that have no role, and you want to like stake them for like really small things, and like try to take some long term upside of like $10 buy-in type games that maybe have some math talent or like some
Sure.
kind of game talent that
Sure. Like more open ended.
well, just more like at the very bottom of whoever attempts to become successful at poker. I would think that there might be an opportunity for these guys that just haven't played at all and
Mm-hmm.
want to play, and maybe they want to, instead of figuring out everything for themselves, and maybe they don't have the means to get $300 because that totally happens
So
quite
100%.
a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like it's not that easy, and like for example, like India or wherever.
Sure.
Um, and yeah, I would think that that's like a realistic possibility.
There are actually staking groups that do that. So there are staking groups. Mine does not specialize in that way, but there are other staking groups that do exactly that, where you just take people like on a potential basis. You give them like $100 or $50, and you you see what the volume is after 30 days. You see if they're working really hard, right? You have conversations with them. You see what the results look like in certain games. You see what their database looks like. There are staking groups that do that. Mine has primarily focused on, just like engineering a profitable shark scope graph by looking at their total game selection, eliminating the unprofitable parts of it, concentrating the schedule and what they can beat, pouring money into that, coaching them regularly, improving their strategies. So like I'll look at their databases. If they have like a 75% fold to 3-bet, we'll raise that as an issue and we'll fix it. If they have, if their big blind, fold to steal in tournaments is, 67%, we'll fix it. We'll bring it down to like 35%, right? We'll show them what's wrong with their preflop strategy. We'll fix the strategy, we'll improve it, and the win rates will follow, right? And it's like very much like boring, like almost like a mechanic. Like the way that I coach is like very mechanistic. Like, okay, this is what you're doing. Your small blind fold to steal is currently 81%. It should be 73%. We fix it.
Sure.
Right? It's just
Yeah, it sounds
all
simple
very
from this perspective.
Yeah, it is simple. Like it's boring.
Well,
like if you actually know how to do it, it's boring. Like it's very simple, very mechanistic, very thorough. And
Sometimes that's good. I mean,
yeah, that's what works, man. That's what works.
Well, I would think I'm trying to think of like how even to spice that up a little bit, but maybe get them to play live poker and say, but wait, now there can be live tells and like.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like, and I, for the most part, with the staking side, mostly concentrate on online, just because the data tracking's better, harder to get stolen from, right? So if you stake some guy live and he loses, he's like, hey man, I lost 20 grand. You kind of have to take his word for it. We've also had in the past a player who we were staking. He won a live tournament, and he we actually had someone at the event, which is just luck. But he was on the final table, and he was like, hey, let's chop. But we'll say that I lost so that my backer doesn't know that I took first place. It'll register as me taking second, but I'll chop with you. And like that got back to us. Like there's just, there's more risks live because there's less basically accounting. Like the accounting is just way better online. So I primarily focus on online staking, engineering profitable shark scope graphs, coaching people in a very like mechanistic, mechanic engineer kind of way. Take this number that's currently down here, bring it up here. Take this number that's up here, bring it down here, right? And go through spot by spot relentlessly, and I work a lot. I don't mind working a lot personally, so it's been successful. But
Oh,
that's kind of,
okay.
yeah.
I'm a bit curious if you have any other stories of you getting screwed over. That seems like a wild one. And also, I would think that getting screwed over actually also follows I believe the word is stochastic pattern, a pattern that is predictable. Actually,
Sure.
is that true?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, like when I first started, so I can tell you a bunch of stories about things going bad. There's a lot. When I first started, I didn't know what I was doing, which is the same thing when I first started playing poker. I had no idea what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So my accounting systems were really weak, and I had over 50%. I think I was like almost 60% of the people that I was working with were stealing from me in some kind of way. Almost
Well,
60%. Yeah.
whoa.
So like if you have no accounting systems, then you're, in my opinion, like, it was my fault. I actually feel take like personal responsibility for it. Like, you're almost like breeding thieves. Like, if you're just sending money without really strong accounting systems, and they can just essentially like take it and hide it from you in a really easy way, it's actually really difficult to be a morally strong enough human not to do that. So in a sense, I was like creating thieves where they didn't exist before. And
Oh.
today, you can basically, like, if you have good accounting systems, those numbers are collapsed. Like, it's like less than 3%. Like, less than 3% of people steal from us. Like, it's very, very, very low. Um,
What was the percent? You said it was 60%
60,
of people?
60,
All right,
60.
so what changed to get you from 60%? First of all, that's kind of sad. I did
Sure.
not think 60% of people could find a way to steal from you.
Well,
Uh, that's really pathetic.
kind of, but you also have a filter on. I mean, like, these people are also like professional, or not professional. These are people who are gamblers who are looking for money. So I mean, like, if you have bad accounting systems with gamblers looking for money, yeah, over half of those people will steal from you. At least that's my experience. If you don't audit them or anything like that. As far as ways to reduce that number, the primary way to reduce that number is through regular audits, like
Okay.
playing audits, deposit audits, game selection audits, but just various forms of audits. People, generally speaking, behave pretty honestly if they think that they're being watched. But if they don't think that they're ever being checked in on or ever being watched, and they think that it's to their economic interest to behave unethically, my personal experience has been that you will get a lot of unethical behavior. And so, but I think that was
Oh,
my fault. I don't really blame that on other people. So,
okay. I'm gonna have to differ a little bit. That certainly, I mean, yeah, there's many things you can do to stop it. Sure.
mhm.
I mean, 60%. I didn't think 60% of people had that much of a tendency to steal from someone that's helping them.
Again, I
Seems
don't think it's
really bad to
60%
me.
of all people. We didn't take 60% of all people that go to church on Sundays. We took
Right.
60% of a bunch of gamblers that are asking me for money. And those people, and they're almost universally men, right? So, like, no women. So, like, I would caution against being like in all of humanity, 60% of people, like, in my sample size, like my data set, which was not exactly, you know, churchgoers or whatever you want to call it, like, just they were, yeah, I got those are the results I got. But I don't necessarily think it's 60% of all people. I just think it's maybe I
So
had a rough sample.
I actually am really curious to see what the percentage of churchgoers is, and I really hope it's not like very high, but I know that it's statistically much more likely that if someone like does something such as swear by God or
Hmm.
say mentions a starving a dying family member or something like this, they're actually
Sure.
far more likely to default. I don't know the percent, but I don't know even. I'm pretty sure there's a big difference between them defaulting and these business type guys who default actually, and the reason
Okay.
is just hypothesized to be. I believe I read this in like a book like "Don't Trust Your Gut," something like that.
I've heard of the book, but
Um,
I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, it seems like up your alley because it just looks at big data for a lot of things, and there's a lot of useful conclusions
Okay.
um, that pertain to success of all kinds, actually,
Hmm.
um, and just show a lot of the illusions that we get into, or that kind of control us. Anyway,
Hmm.
so yeah, it was hypothesized that the business type people did tend to pay back because they're like in the habit of actually paying back and like doing
Sure.
things as like black and white, like right and wrong kind of thing.
Hmm.
Whereas people that aren't in the or yeah, I guess they're just in the habit of doing business is the idea,
Sure.
and that people in like that are in church or are, well, not necessarily people in church. I hope that people in church are doing what the actual church says told you to do. Like what
Sure.
the like that's the funny thing about people complaining about these things like religion, etc. Is it literally is supposed to be telling you to be a good person,
Hmm.
and then yeah, there's bad people in it, but like I would hope that on the whole, the people that go to are voluntarily go to religious service are actually
Nope.
good people, are better people than average.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, I use church as an example like multiple times, but I could have, maybe I should have, like, I'm not a religious person, I don't go to church personally at all, but I could have better maybe used an example of saying if we took a sample of volunteers at a hospital, if we took a sample of volunteers at a children's hospital, and we put them
yeah,
in a situation where they have the capacity to steal, like, and get away with it. My hope would be for humanity that the percentage is lower than 60%, that the percentage of those people that choose to steal is a much lower percentage, right? And that
yeah,
the percentage of gamblers that ask me for money to, when you don't have proper audit mechanisms in place, that's going to be high, right? So, like, again, I think that I kind of got what I deserved, and lost a bunch of money. The majority of them paid it back too once they um, once they were like audited, and it was found out, like, hey man, you stole like 10 G's from me over the last like 2 years. And he was just like, yuck bro, like, I needed, every once in a while I just needed money to pay bills. I didn't know I didn't even know it was 10 grand. I'm sorry. Like, I'll pay you back over the next few years, like, if we, as I win. I'm like, I'm like, sure, no problem. And like, they just paid it back. um
yeah.
so
I
yeah.
think most people will. Most people, in my experience, do want to do the right thing at some level, and not like active offenders.
Sure.
There's quite a few active offenders that are taken down on Twitter and all that.
Sure.
But for the rest of them, it's cool with me. I'm
Hmm.
curious what these audit mechanisms are that stopped 60% of cheating,
Sure. Well, it's, yeah, 60% of stealing. So the
stealing.
60%, yeah, not cheating, 60% of stealing. But as far as the audit mechanisms, like I said, it's just playing history audits, game selection audits. Most of the poker sites, if you email, like you can send an email, like the player who plays on the account, not the staker, but the player that plays on the account can request playing audits, game history audits, withdrawal audits from the poker operator, and then they can just give them to us, and we can just review them for like how much money they're cashing out personally, and if like there's some discrepancy, if there's some problem, right? And if you review that information like pretty regularly, and people expect you to review that information, they behave pretty honorably. But if you don't, if you're not doing that, then you might get a result like the one that I got. And again, I think it was my fault. I'm not trying to blame anybody for it, but it's just like, I wasn't doing anything, and I got stolen from a lot. So
It sounds really simple. You just like
it
get
is
the.
simple. That's why I was stupid. Like this, the solution for it was really simple, but I wasn't doing it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's not even not complex.
Nope.
Um, so I'm curious. You seem to have a really good reputation, or a pretty good reputation. It's hard to say for sure for your coaching program.
Sure.
Um, it sounded simple when we talked about it. It just sounded thorough, and that
Hmm.
you basically had to do a shitload of drills.
Sure.
Which I mean, I've heard of this before,
Hmm.
and even like thought like maybe to do it myself, but like why reinvent the wheel?
Sure.
Um, and so, what is it that yeah? Um, what is it that makes your coaching program really stand out? Do you think?
Sure.
Is it
I'm
something
actually
that
gonna.
I've
I'm
heard that?
actually gonna. I'm gonna look
Huh?
off screen. Yeah, I'm gonna look off screen for just a second so that you can. And I'll actually like read this off to you almost, right? So, what I'm
Okay.
doing off screen is I just pulled up. I loaded up Poker Tracker 4, and so if you say
Hmm.
like, what is like the coaching program? Like, what's the essence of it that gets people like really good results that are different from like what exists elsewhere, right? So I use Poker Tracker 4. We import a student's database into the program. Okay. Generally speaking, I want to work with at least 50 to 100,000 hands. Okay. So I've
Hmm.
got someone that can give me 50 to 100,000 hands, and then we'll run a full like database report. So I'll look at the overall report, and I'll just read stuff off to you as far as like statistics go, that we're
Okay.
looking at, right? So I'll look at like obviously player position, hands, VPIP, call preflop 2-bet, so call raise first in, right? Raise first in, fold to 3-bet, blah 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 blah, limp 3-bets, fold to steal, VPIP versus steal from big blind small blind, C-bet percentage, fold to C-bet percentage, fold to C-bet in heads up pots, raise flop in heads up pots, check raise flop in heads up pots, bet versus miss bets, like probe turn, heads up, right, on and on and on and on and on. So that's the report. And I can go through that report in 6 minutes. So it doesn't take me like an hour. I can go through this report. It goes all the way to the river. I can go through the report in 6 minutes and I can see like what their strategy looks like statistically. Okay, so we start with that. So I have a statistical understanding of like what someone's doing. Then we have actual filters that go through, and there are probably like 100 of them, maybe 150 of them, something like that. And I'll isolate the bottom of a given range, right? So it'll be like bottom of the big blind 3-bet versus steal for missed 3-bets. Bottom of big blind call versus button raise first in, right? Bottom of big blind call versus button raise first in fold mistakes. So I'll isolate the bottom of the big blind call versus a button steal. I'll see what the win rate is. If the win rate's bad, I won't coach them into defending more. Even if they're missing defends, I won't coach them into defending more until the win rate at the bottom of the range looks pretty good. If the win rate at the bottom of the range for big blind call versus button steal does look good, then oftentimes someone will have 200 hands in this total sample of hands that are possible, right? They played 50 of them. They folded 200 of them. But their win rates are really good for playing them, and their win rates obviously negative, like around negative 15 in tournaments for folding them because of the ante, right? Mm-hmm. So we get them to play them. I'm like, listen, if you play these hands, things are going great. You're currently folding these hands, start playing them. All right, so bottom big blind call versus button RFI, bottom big blind call versus cutoff RFI, bottom big blind call versus cutoff RFI, fold mistakes, bottom big blind call versus hijack RFI, bottom big blind call versus hijack RFI, fold mistakes. I know it sounds repetitive, right, and redundant, but it's like for every single spot, right? Bottom button call versus cutoff raise first in, bottom button call versus cutoff raise first in, over defending, bottom button call versus cutoff raise first in, over folding, right? And we'll isolate like what their particular mistake is. We'll fix it. And we just like go through every single scenario. And so it goes to, that's pre-flop, right? It's very thorough pre-flop, but it also exists for 3-bet pots. But then I'll have the same thing for post-flop, where it's like, 1 second, let me just get an easy example. Miss-flop C-bet opportunities, UTG versus low jack, 10 high plus boards. Miss-flop C-bet opportunities, UTG versus low jack, 9 high boards and below. Miss-flop C-bet opportunities, blah, 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 blah. Right? And we do this for every single scenario in the game. Right? I could show you what this, if I could share my screen, I could show you the filters if you wanted to see them. But yeah, I just loaded the program.
Show like a couple examples is probably enough. Probably not show all your filters, but a couple examples would be like, I mean, it's not that hard to imagine what they might be. Like just on the gun, C-bet versus big blind or whatever. And I heard you had like an enormous database of hands to like kind of check this against and make sure everything's good.
Sure. So I'm not a big like MDA guy, right? So MDA is against TOU for like most training sites and stuff like that, or most playing sites.
TOU. MDA is minimal defense. No,
that's MDF.
Oh,
so MDA is like mass database analysis, right? So where you aggregate all the data into one place. So I don't personally do that. Again, I have lots of
game optimal. What is GOU?
I don't know what GOU is.
I thought you said MDA versus GOU.
No, I didn't. Oh, then I misspoke. I must have just been stumbling. I just said MDA. MDA is mass database analysis, and I said TOU, terms of use. So most of the poker sites, most of the online poker sites, really don't want you doing that, and so I don't do it. So I don't have some big aggregated data set for like it would be easy for me to do it, but I don't do it.
Right. Well, there you go.
So
see, that's that real honor we're talking about. I mean, you can get mass databases from other sites anyway. That it's not a game against TOA, so you could do that like that.
Yeah, sure.
It's hard to like imagine that that's wrong. I mean, I guess. Well, my understanding was you have it more from like a bunch of students and that sort of thing.
Yes, I mean, I have a database from every single student, right? But you can today like this. I don't know how much you use the software. Like I don't know how much you use tools like aggregated reports, right, for figuring out what strategy looks like. I don't know if you do that at all. But today you can do that, right? So like there's software that you can use that you can access, tools that are very popular, and they'll produce like an aggregated report for button versus big blind, what the C-bet percentage should be, and button versus big blind versus button, what the fold to C-bet percentage should be. Right?
Yeah.
And if someone's got like a number that's radically different from that, we have a problem, right? Generally speaking, right? Simple. Again, I told you, like once you actually know what I'm doing, it's very basic.
So
It's just
I,
thorough.
I have I have a question I've asked kind of a decent amount of people on the podcast, which is so how beatable is online poker still? It sounds like it's just you do the work, and
Hmm.
eventually you're gonna win
Sure,
from your formula. It sounds like you
sure.
formalized this.
Yeah. So if you do the work, then you'll win. Still, yeah, it is like pretty. I think it's still the opportunity is still there. How good you have to be has increased. Obviously, like that's normal. Um, like metagames converge on like basically GTO over time, right? As the tools improve over time, as the strategy, as what is appropriate to do is more well known, the overall metagame moves in the direction of like a GTO based strategy over time. So the games get better.
Right.
Like that's just the facts. But yeah, the opportunity set is still there. Also, though, there are a lot of ring fence markets, right? So there are a lot of markets that are where there's a regulatory barrier that is isolating that market from international competition. And
Right.
those
Right.
markets are extraordinarily beatable online. So, for
Yeah. Yeah.
examples,
I
there
know.
you have markets like, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
You have
I know
also
about that one.
various various U.S. markets. But you also have like Ontario and Canada. The entire market in India is very soft, right? But it has a big regulatory barrier around it. They don't let foreign competition in. But so like markets that have regulatory barriers, those are like just gold mines still. But even without that, like even on international sites, like just straight up GG or
Italian
Poker
market,
Stars.
maybe.
Yeah, yeah, Italian is great as far as a market with a regulatory barrier. But even when you pull away from that, you can still be very very successful. It will take more time, right? And your ceiling will be lower, 100%. So like if you're in a ring fence market with a regulatory barrier, enjoy it, monetize it while you're there and while it lasts, because if that wall ever comes down, win rates will drop like massively.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing I tell the people in my Discord to do is, I mean, there's no getting around the work, but I just
Hmm.
tell them to like go for these markets if they can. It
Hmm.
makes sense to, or like move to Italy or whatever the you have to do, just
Yep.
because it will make them make funny money a lot faster.
Hmm.
It won't help them get that much better at poker, which they have to do.
Yep.
But I mean, it's at the end of the day, you still need to make money. If you're trying to make money, you
Sure.
still need to find like the soft spots.
Yep. Yeah, that's a big part of what staking is too, right? So there's staking on the like when we run a staking organization, we're scaled, like relative to an individual, right? Obviously, scale is a relative thing, right? In life, scale is a relative thing, and in online poker, like the staking groups are scaled relative to individuals. There's just no doubt about that. So we will notice win rates collapse on a network like way before a player would ever be able to find out if they were just playing there themselves, and we will like a like a Death Star. We will move the ship off of the network where win rates have collapsed and concentrate all the money onto a network where win rates are higher. Um,
Right.
that's
Oh,
just business, right? Like that's just pretty common sense. Like we have SharkScope data for 150 players playing on this poker site, and last year win rates were great, and like this year win rates are 40% of what they were last year, and the next year they're 10% of what they were the year before that. It's like okay, we have to stop playing on this site and we have to go play on these other sites because the money is just way better. So that's a part of staking too, is like directing the game selection through data.
yeah, yeah, of course.
Sure.
Yeah, it makes loads of sense. So I'm curious, did you have any underlying reasons for deciding on doing staking, or you just kind of fell into it and realized, and fell into it and decided to focus on it? Like, are there any inner motives for it other than it's successful?
Yeah. So I mean, like when I first started playing poker, I was a door to door salesman, and so like I was doing door to door sales in Canada. I had my own like little small campaigns, like basically selling water, and I was making like minimum wage basically. So when I first started playing, it was just about money, right? That's why I started playing. And when I
Hmm.
started staking, it was pretty much the same thing. It wasn't like a particularly unique insight, I don't think. I think lots of people have the same insight, which is that if I'm playing poker and I can make $100,000 a year, or $200,000 a year, or $300,000 a year, then if I stake two people and I take 50% of their profit, I can replace myself. Now, unfortunately, in reality, it doesn't work anywhere close to that because there's theft risks and they're not as good as you and all of that. But the idea still basically holds, right? Like if I stake 10 people, like how many people do I have to stake before I can replace myself, right? It's not 2, even though it sounds like it might be 2. It's definitely not 2. But it might not be 4. It might not be 100 either, right? It might be like 15 or 20 or 25. And so at its core, I think like things that last a really long time, unless you have a lot of money or a lot of resources behind you, things that last a really, really long time professionally typically have a profit motive, right? So like for the most part,
Sure.
I was trying to make more money. Yeah, I was trying to make more money. And it
Okay.
made eminent sense to me to, to try to stake 15 people, 20 people, 25 people to like essentially replace myself, right? And,
Right.
get up to 150 people and making way more money doing that with way less volatility, right? For sure, than individuals experience. Like I've never had a losing year with staking, ever. Right. Most players have had like break even or losing years, even if they're very decorated pros. But I've never had a losing year with staking. Because if you have 150 people putting in the sample size, then, you smooth out the swings. Swings might be bigger, but the swings are smoothed out.
Right.
Now, today, I try to, a big part of it is like helping people. Like I've got some people who have, I don't want to like single them out, but I have some students that I work with like really closely where I put in like a lot of overtime that's unpaid just because their like personal situations are I want to help them, right? Like their personal situations are like where they had a really good job, but maybe they had a child that required more attention, and
Hmm.
in order to provide that child with more attention, they had to leave their really high paying job. And it's like there's an example like this that I work with right now, and this person's like an awesome guy, and he just needs he wants to try to make online poker work so that he can be available at home more regularly. And so like I'm putting in a lot of work with an individual like that for reasons that are a little bit less economic, but that's more exception than rule, right? Like most of what I'm doing is trying to make money.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like what I do is like I've been reasonably successful over the years, right? So I don't have to like do that every single time. I don't have to like profit maximize every time.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to. I mean, there's like a certain element of business that has to be profit maximization. It's not inherently bad. It's just when that's the only value at all,
Yeah,
then
sure.
then it can be undermined in a few different ways. I read that you are interested in how do I say it? Like in self improvement, not just in poker, but in other ways as well. Is that accurate, or did I misunderstand?
No, I mean I read a lot. I read a lot of books. I train a lot. I don't. I'm not as deep into meditation as I think that you are. I believe in meditation. I believe that it works, but I'm not like a sophisticated meditative practitioner or anything like that. But I read a lot. I train combat sports a lot. I stay in shape, so I exercise regularly. I wrestle. I do jujitsu. I do Muay Thai. Um, so and I don't waste time, right? So like I'm constantly trying to improve myself and get better across various domains.
Right.
Staking business has been something where like there aren't that many like examples of people that have tried to go the way that I've gone. Like I've gone a pretty unique road, right? Like most poker players, most poker players realistically, they play poker, they're pretty good at it. If they can make money, that's great. They stake people, they lose money at it, they make the money back playing poker themselves, and like that's how most people do it. Whereas like I played poker, I made just under $1 million, and then I built like a very scaled up staking organization where I was
Hmm.
coaching full time. I coach today 30 hours a week. That's just the coaching side plus the other stuff that I do. So yeah, I mean, like I'm very much like self improvement focused. Like try to improve who I am and how I do things, and take a lot of
Sure.
personal responsibility for things that go wrong,
Hmm.
instead of trying to like blame them on other people, because I find
Oh
that
yeah,
you
of
get better
course.
outcomes that way. So
I view it as just you apply where the potential is to fix the problem that your agency to where it can be applied
Sure.
versus like kind of just like mindlessly reacting to the world.
Hmm.
At least if your strategy is blaming other people, like it's not, sometimes it is other people's fault, but you can act your own. You still have your own agency over that, and you can like fire these people or whatever it is, and then you're
Yeah,
still
sure.
at fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the meditation stuff, I'm not like as deep as I should be. I think it's just more a realization that basically meditate what meditation is
Hmm.
a lot of the time is redirect, not letting, is like creating some kind of space between your emotional impulsivity and your actions. So it's like one of these things that helps one. It seems like it's the only, not the only way, but a really important way to help you control your energy more, which I at some point realized, well, if I'm trying to do anything, the thing
Hmm.
that matters really the most is having disciplined, uh, like disciplined use of your own energy, like basically disciplined mind,
Hmm.
is what that boils down to. And no one has that actually. Like almost everyone does all sorts of stupid shit and like uses their energy in some kind of stupid way. And so this is like I kind of got to see this over time and just really came around to the idea of meditating more. So I've been doing it more lately. It's hard to say how effective it is, but it makes a lot of sense it's very effective because yeah, it's just really easy to be reactive in some kind of way that is inefficient. It seemed that the optimization of one's action and asset of energy, you have the idea of the optimization of money
Hmm.
um, being like scaling it in the right way or whatever it is. But
Hmm.
the within even before that, the optimization of your own energy would be to get to the point where you're in control of all your energy and you can just do whatever you want. Meaning, like, if you had to put together a system to learn Chinese or whatever, you could just do it, and there'd be no issues with like, um, there wouldn't be so many issues or mitigated. There would be mitigated issues with like recoil from like trying to do something very hard, like that kind of thing.
Okay.
Uh, but that's on the topic of meditation.
Yeah.
Um, whereas there's like quite some science to this.
Yeah, there is. There's tons now. Like, there's a lot of science that supports like meditative practice, and I've looked into it for those reasons. Really, I just haven't I just haven't done anything about it, which is usually not like me. But I haven't. I'm pretty like I'm not that I'm too busy to meditate. Like, I don't think you're really too busy to do anything. If you just make it a priority, it'll get done.
Yeah, yeah,
But
for
I
sure.
always have like very like my life is really heavily scheduled, right? Like, my life is pretty heavily scheduled. So um, from like 6 o'clock in the morning, like, I'll wake up at like 5:15 a.m., do a 6 o'clock meeting or coaching session, and it'll be scheduled until my daughter basically comes home from school, and then I'll spend time with my daughter, and then I'll probably go train in the evening,
Hmm.
and I'll be working on something until I go to sleep, and then wake up and do it again, 7 days a week, pretty much, like 6 to 7 days a week.
Yeah,
So
well, okay. I mean, that's a way to do things. That's the benefit of having some routine.
yeah,
I like trying to figure out how to make flying around and doing a million things work, but
sure.
it's a little bit inefficient in a way. But on the topic of coaching, as you're speaking about it, it sounds really like the same thing over and over again. I would think that you could use an AI to do a lot of it for you,
Yep.
actually,
Hmm.
if that's possible. Like, are you looking into that? Is that
It's
something that's
funny
going to happen
because
in the future?
well, so yeah, somebody brought that up to me actually like 2 or 3 days ago. I'm more like workhorse. Like, I'll put in the hours. Like, I have no problem putting in the hours and doing the work. I'm less like tech savvy within poker. The tools that are required, like, very much so. I'm very familiar with all of them. As far as like what an AI is capable of, um, and on like the human side in terms of like importing strategies and then having things get exported out and retaining like trying to figure out how to do that where I'm retaining like a lot of the economic rights. Um, I don't know how to do that. So like I could hire someone and like I could build it, But am I actively looking into it? No. Other people have mentioned it to me, though. You're not the first person that's mentioned that idea.
Well, it seems like this would save you a load of time if you could make this happen. Because, like
Yeah.
you said, you're coaching 30 hours a week, and I'm sitting here thinking these coaching sessions sounds like basically the same thing. And
Hmm.
in my head, this would sound this gives the idea of like, okay, this sounds kind of boring actually.
It can definitely get boring. It can definitely get boring, and it definitely gets repetitive. It's kind of, but it's like a job, right? It's like I just view teaching poker like the same way that someone views teaching math. You know what I mean? Like if you're a math teacher, you go to a school and you teach. You know, if you're a grade 6 math teacher or a grade 8 math teacher, you go to school, you teach math 8 hours a day, and it's pretty much the same subject all day long, right? I have the luxury of at least varying the lesson, right? I can teach like, double barreling, or I can teach, hey, this is the bottom of your range. If we're gonna run a filter for you checking all of your air on the river. We're just gonna run a filter for you checking all of your air on the river, and we're gonna look for missed river bluffs, and we're gonna spend 1 hour looking at all the spots that you should have bluffed that you didn't. And
yeah,
it's
that's
like,
really effective.
yeah,
Seems like exactly what you need to do.
yeah,
Look at the people always say like, oh, like I played the hand. You have to look at every single opportunity that you
sure,
have in order to improve and say,
yeah,
okay, which one should you take it?
yep, yeah. So we do that for 60 minutes, and then I go to the next guy. And I do this, and if I want to, I'll do the same one. But if I don't want to, I'll go look at something else. We'll go look at like, okay, let's look at all the times that you check raise the flop and didn't barrel the turn, and we'll see if some of those times were you should have been barreling. And sometimes we'll just get players like they check raise and they just wimp out. Or conversely, we can look at all the times that you check raise the flop and you barreled the turn, but you bet small. I can run a filter for like you betting like 30% after you check raise the flop. Why would you bet 30% after you check raise the flop in most situations? You have a polar range, right? It's nuts or air. Most of the time, the bet size should be relatively large. Why are you down betting the turn in these situations? And maybe they're right, but oftentimes they're wrong. And so, like, same idea. Or how often? Let's run a filter for how often you bet under 40% in position on the river. How often are you betting under 40% in position on the river? Because you shouldn't be doing that very often. So let's just see how often you're doing it. Oh, look, you do it a lot. This sucks. Let's stop doing it, and we'll improve the strategy. And we just do this, right, like incrementally for all the spots. But I can vary the spots. So I don't have to go through, like, every day it's the same one. But there's still a limit. There's not, like, limitless number of spots. So if you're doing 30 hours a week, every week, 52 weeks, 51 weeks a year, right? It's, like, repetitive. Sure. So an AI would be helpful, yeah. But I don't have the skill set, at least not yet, to get it. I could maybe hire 1 or 2 people and figure it out, but at the moment, I don't have the skill set to get it done.
Yeah, I guess big companies hire AI specialists and these sorts of things. There's probably a solution to that one.
There is probably, yeah. That's a good idea.
All right, cool. What other kinds of books? Well, what kinds of books do you read? I don't know of any of the books that you read besides something that verifies. Oh, by the way, meditation was in the woo-woo category, meaning people thought it was all bullshit until like the 1950s or 60s. I don't know the exact decade, but it's relatively recently that meditation yoga were thought to be kind of bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, we're figuring out tons of things, right? I mean, until 1990, we didn't know what effective martial arts looked like in fighting, right? Like it was all basically bullshit. And then like basically like the Ultimate Fighter and like other MMA organizations were just like, hey, let's just have people fight with all these different disciplines and we'll just like see what works, right? Now you can find out, we find out that like for the most part it's like kickboxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, like those are like the main disciplines that are actually effective in combat. And like there are lots of other disciplines that people practice that have like, their own merits, but primarily like those 4 disciplines carry all the weight in actual hand-to-hand combat, right?
Yeah, I've heard that everything's kind of boiled down to like grappling and what else? And
yes, grappling and striking would be the two major categories. But yeah, so I mean, like we didn't know in 1970 like if a guy did kung fu or if a guy did boxing or if a guy did this, like which ones would win, right? Like we're learning all of this stuff, I think, in basically like in real time, which is cool, it's really exciting. As far as the books that I personally read, I tend to read nonfiction. I don't read a lot of fiction. I primarily read business books, and I basically read them to like find inspiration, things like that. I read poker books. Matt Jonda's Applications of No Limit Hold'em was a really good poker book when it was written. I still think it would be relevant for people if they read it today. For people that are interested in tournament poker, Michael Acevedo's book, Modern Poker Theory, is really good. I
I
don't
didn't hear
have
about that one. I did read Matt Jonda's book. I found it to be really math oriented. It was like too much for.
too much. Yeah. Well, I mean, I liked it. I mean, the way that I approached the game and like I thought it was really good. But yeah, like those two books, like I have no relationship with either one of those guys, zero. but I think that both of them are helpful for poker players. But yeah, like mostly I'm reading like nonfiction, a lot of business stuff, and trying to kind of like get inspiration, like see how people handle problems, like how people handle different business problems when they come up.
Oh,
Um,
there's a few business books that really inspired me actually. Have you ever heard of Patrick Lencioni? I think is his name.
no, I haven't. I'll write it down though.
Well, he goes over some tough problems that loads of people are probably. I mean, I was having some of them myself, and like goes into like how exactly you should deal with them. A good example um, was there's a boss and he was like struggling with his business or whatever. Apparently, there's loads of accountability in being a CEO, and it really is just like dealing with like a lot of the people problems and hiring the right people. But one problem that he had was like he had someone who was listening to a lot of his problems as CEO and just consistently not doing a good job. And then at some point, he like had to fire him, but he had the situation where the guy was like his friend now, so he didn't. He did it kind of all of a sudden because the guy's results were so bad. And then
Hmm.
the seasoned entrepreneur says, "Why don't you just tell him like, dude, you're gonna get fired if you don't start improving?" And he just like
Yep.
didn't have the and, like basically just is like zero bullshit in
Yep.
being a CEO. You have to just find effective ways to communicate, and that's it.
Yeah.
But those yeah, I think that one was like the seven sins of being a CEO, something like that. But
Okay.
there's another one called the motive of being a CEO, which goes into. I mean, this one's inspiring because I mean it actually goes back to spirituality, but the real best CEOs have an inner motive. They have some kind of. I mean, basically, it's more like figuring out what exactly you want to do, sort
Hmm.
of thing, or to find that inner motive if one doesn't have it, I guess, or either find whether it exists or like do something else. But
Sure.
basically, like there was a guy that it kind of came down to this point of like you'd have to basically take care of a lot of the people that were working for your company, but it was possible to it was very much in the similar vein of poker that it seemed like success was inevitable if you like mastered all these kinds of skills
Sure.
from what I read.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I wrote down both books, and I'll definitely check out both.
They're short
Um,
too, and the way that they teach is a lot more interesting. They teach through story
okay.
uh, rather than um, rather than just like sheer facts and data.
Right.
Good to Great was inspiring, actually.
Yeah, I've read that one.
You did read that
Collins.
one,
Yeah, by Collins, right?
yeah.
Yep.
But
Good to great. Yeah. Go ahead.
that one. It seemed to show me that all the same traits that lead someone to becoming a successful poker player are basically the same traits. I mean, the really core traits, um, like that lead to being successful at business.
Hmm.
So maybe you think, huh, okay, maybe there's something here.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap. I mean, I think that um, the like persistence is like massively underrated, man. Like if you could teach people persistence, then as like a skill as like very young people, like children, for example, like durability, that is absolutely enormous. Like that skill set is
So
worth so much. Pardon me.
it is taught, by the way, and
Okay.
this has been found, kind of, is kind of discovered relatively recently in figuring out where the biggest positive impact was made.
Hmm.
But basically, people started to think that were experts in the subject started to think it was sport, and that is because sport literally teaches perseverance.
Hmm.
Sport or games, you can say. So basically, what's the best way to teach perseverance? If you think about it, how the do you teach it? At least in my mind, there's only really one way. You have someone work hard and actually succeed, and
Hmm.
and you can make these loops longer and longer. You
Right.
can and they could start when someone's ability to succeed is kind of low,
Hmm.
and that's why we have video games or whatever.
Sure.
And then if people can win at those video games, maybe they'll think, oh, maybe I can win at basketball or
Sure.
business or something like that, which has like far more difficult payoff
Yeah.
situations than, or far longer payoff situations than these kinds of games. So it is actually actively taught uh, naturally, matter of
Sure.
fact, but it can be expounded upon. I
Sure.
mean, the drills you said, the drills I guess you mentioned can create that sort of scenario.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like I try to do the same thing actually more with my daughter, where like as she finds different sports and things like different interests,
Hmm.
she wanted to start playing soccer. The first time she went to play soccer, the other kids had already been playing. She started mid season, so the other kids already had some skills. She's 6 years old, and she just like she couldn't line her foot up with the ball, and she was basically she wasn't getting past the ball because they knew she would lose the ball, and she wasn't having much fun. So we just came home and we just started practicing for like 30 minutes a day every day. So not like some grueling thing, but just like every single day we'll practice for 30 minutes. These kids are only playing for 2 hours a week every week. So if they've been playing for 2 hours a week for 3 months, that's only 12 sessions, right? So like if we do 24 sessions of 30 minutes at home, like you'll catch up. It'll be fine. And then within like a few months, she was like one of the best players on the team, and she like gets the confidence of like understanding. Oh, like if I'm not good at something, but if I practice it for like a small window of time consistently, I can get good at something, right? And yeah, so that's like my own approach to like trying to teach the same thing. But yeah, I do think that persistence, like perseverance, like I said, durability. I think a lot of people, if they're running a small business, staking, for example, and it's like break even, right? Because at that time it wasn't like I was making a bunch of money because I had 50 to 60% of the people stealing from me. So it's hard to be getting rich if half the guys are stealing from you. So like things are break even at best. Like maybe I'm down a little bit or whatever lifetime at staking at this point, and I wake up and I see 50% of people are stealing from me. There are like probably two big responses, right? The first big response is like, oh my god, this is impossible. These people are all evil. Look at all these evil people that I'm working with. I'm gonna quit. I'm done. I'm never doing this again. Alternatively, it's like, oh my god, look at how much money I can make if I could just solve this problem of half the people stealing from me. So we're just gonna start putting in systems to prevent them from stealing from me, and then we'll be fine, right? And those are like two
Sure.
pretty rational responses. Like both responses are logical. Like you could empathize with someone doing either one. But the guy that quits gets no outcome. Like he gets no positive outcome, right? So
Right.
yeah,
Well, good for you for choosing the route that actually leads to success. And
well, I mean, yeah, durability. Though, like I said, persistence, not quitting, like taking responsibility. Like it's my fault that I'm in this spot because I have shitty mechanisms for detecting theft. So I'll put in good
right,
ones and I'll solve the problem. So
right. Yeah, the thing you did with your daughter sounds perfect too. It makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, from a certain perspective, one thing that I've realized, I mean, at least it's possible to view things this way. I don't always view them this way.
mhm.
I view them this way, or at least like a philosophical dilemma of sorts, is like there's this idea of what's right and wrong, right? And putting yourselves in the shoes of these people that steal, putting ourselves in the shoes of people that steal in these situations where they can get away with it and profit,
Mhm.
it appears actually from a neutral perspective that these people who are stealing are doing the quote unquote right thing.
Mhm.
Well, because they're making something that's they it could be conjectured that they do that, meaning that we know intuitively they're not. Obviously, we know is the funny thing, but because their decision is like seems rational in that if they steal, they'll have more money, and it's
Mhm.
really easy to get away with it.
Mhm.
Like one can argue, well, what the f- is this theoretical right thing that we're talking about? Like it looks like the
Mhm.
right thing is steal, and
Sure.
yeah, and so this is one of my biggest philosophical dilemmas actually because it does seem like scumbags get away with it really in a lot of situations, but I can't bring myself to. It seems like I can never forfeit my belief in there's a universal good.
Mhm.
But anyway, the reason why I mention this is because many systems of sorts in poker today don't work in the sense of like they don't incentivize the right behavior. the paper we know is right, that like not stealing, uh, and they incentivize people to like run away with debts and things like that. But yeah, that's one of the major hurdles for poker in general. Is that if anyone wants to bother dealing with business, doing business outside of like just dealing online. Online is a lot simpler actually. The situation you describe is kind of similar to Africa in a way.
Okay.
Um, Africa, like doing business in Africa, is from what I hear, like a lot easier to deal with online because like live, there's so little, you know, there aren't so many accountability systems, and a
Yep.
lot of things just there's lots of ways to get screwed over in Africa, basically.
Okay.
But yeah, yeah, I mentioned all this just because like we need to fix the accountability systems in fucking poker. But
Yeah. So one of the things you said was like it seems like the right thing is to steal, right? I think that from that perspective, like my personal like philosophical belief about it is like you 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 start with like things that are right for you at an individual level, but then for that to be right, it also has to be like either neutral or positive for the neighbor, right? For the person who's to your left or right, and like you can
right,
continue to expand that. Like for something to be right, it's good for, or like for something to be good, like they compete, almost ideas compete on this sort of continuum where like it has to be good for me and then good for the person next to me and then ultimately good for a lot of people, and like the better something is, like the stronger it is in terms of like the right thing to do, the further you can extend this and it still holds true, right?
this is
Whereas,
a go ahead.
oh yeah, yeah, and whereas like the reverse would obviously be evil, right? But go ahead, what were you gonna say?
This is basically the way you're describing it anyway. Is exactly what Immanuel Kant said.
Okay,
Uh, yeah, he said like there's a lot of different methods of dealing with morality or like philosophies that deal with morality. Basically, the religions are philosophies, by the way. They have a philosophical element to them, I should say. And Kant had his own thing and said basically that, and that, yeah, essentially that out at affinity, the same action has to occur. He was kind of interesting in that he followed his philosophy to the T. He he like there was some kind of ruling about him that was like wildly inconvenient, and he just I forget what it was, but it's like something similar to like he couldn't teach or something, and he just followed this for like 20 years, um,
okay,
and
I'm gonna have to
yeah,
read about him then. I'm familiar with the
well,
name, but I haven't studied him at all.
well, he's very deep, and he gets all these philosophies basically converge towards the uh, the main the main religions at their core anyway. But that's my shit.
Sure.
My audience is like a bit interested in that, but
Okay.
it goes really deep. You'd be surprised at how much consistency there is across multiple different cultures and all that. I never had any idea until I started diving.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Maybe like I said, maybe I have to start diving then. Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
I'm much less familiar. This is like not terrain where I would stand on firm ground. So,
Oh,
which
okay.
sounds like
Yeah.
it's interesting for me to learn about it though, for sure.
Yeah. If it's up your alley, like history, etc., has lots of crazy stories. History's not boring at all. Like it's in a way, there's a parallel, by the way, between history and the stories of Dragon Ball Z, which I noticed you have, in that the
Sure.
same, and it's also true. Yes, and true in any good media, but basically, media follows stories follow a set of different arranged emotions, and all of those are essentially the same. I believe, there's like 16 or 17 patterns of arranged emotions. I need to find the book that stated this,
Okay.
but and this is true of the stories in history as well. But it never gets boring because there's always new crazy things that happen. Um, so somehow it uses this emotional formula to create a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, and Dragon Ball Z did exactly that, and it was like a little bit formulaic as well, but it still managed to like capture a lot of attention.
Yeah. These like kind of like archetypes for how you work super hard. Hero starts from nothing, has nothing, climbs. Work. It's they're repeated, right? Like they're these like stories that get repeated over and over and over again. But yeah, I mean, like I like them. I like the posters. Um, they're uh, they're just fun. Like I'm in this room all day long, right? Like I'm in here a lot, so something to look at, and yeah. I don't know, motivates me a little bit, I guess, almost. Like there's a teacher in the middle, and there's the student to the left. So yeah, I don't know, just like keep working, keep going, don't quit. Things suck sometimes. I have an expression that I use with the guys that I work closely with. Like it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows. Like things get really hard, and you just plug away, keep going, never quit.
Well, at the end of the rain, there's always a sunshine and rainbow.
There you
right?
go.
There's most of the time.
That's true.
Yeah, could end with that.
Okay,
I would
sure.
personally. Okay, so is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we wrap things up?
No, I mean, it was a really big honor to just to be able to speak with you, and I was nervous in the beginning, to be honest with you, just because to me you're like a legend, and I don't say this word very often to anybody that I've actually spoken with in person, but almost like a hero, if you will. Like you're just like an apex. Yeah, well, it's the truth, man. So I mean, like it's just it was a really huge honor to be here. So I really appreciate you having me on, and yeah, like I said, I was actually genuinely super nervous. I don't like saying I'm nervous when I open in a conversation because I don't feel like it helps. But yeah, I was definitely nervous in the beginning because I was just like, I can't believe I'm talking to Jungle Man. So it's a really cool experience for me, and I really appreciate you taking your time.
Yeah, well, thank you for your time. It's been great talking to you as well and getting your insights on how things work.